Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this November 17th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can catch my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's Pacific time on First Amendment. They also play the show at 11 a.m. Pacific time, and if you can't get it then, please go to my long-standing website at arcticbeacon.com. That's arcticbeacon.com. And you can get shows going back over a decade regarding what I call the Vatican-led New World Order. Okay, folks, they call this show the alternative to the alternative media for good reason. And the reason is we get into subjects that are basically taboo or hidden on the mainstream as well as hidden on the alternative media. And that is the connection between the Vatican and our government's foreign and domestic policy, as well as their control worldwide to bring about a one-world government, a one-world order. That's it in a nutshell. All week I've been concentrating, folks, on the persecution of the Tony Alamo Christian ministry, a true Christian ministry, persecuted by, well, let me read to you something here. We started a petition on the web, and we've got a whole bunch of signatures, and what we're planning to do is to try to get Tony Alamo, who's been put in jail for 175 years, pardoned. And let me read this off the petition. It says, Tony Alamo and his Christian ministry have been targeted for more than 40 years by the U.S. government agencies, including, but not limited to, the FBI, the BATF, the CIA, IRS. Now, the FBI informants have come forward with sworn testimony they were hired to frame Pastor Alamo for his biblical and political views, also given directions by the Clintons to do this, which makes it very timely, looking at the elections and now Trump being sworn in January. So here's the sworn testimony by these informants who were hired to do this was not allowed in his 2008 criminal trial for violations of the Mann Act, in which close examination of the trial and appeal documents indicate a miscarriage of justice of the worst degree, which I've talked about for years on this show. And it's culminating now with this petition to pardon Tony. Now, furthermore, this ministry has been falsely depicted as a cult by government officials and an orchestrated media campaign of the ruling elite and Vatican-controlled powers in our government. Our goal is to have the 82-year-old Pastor Alamo released from prison immediately. He has already served more than 8 years for a 175-year sentence, incredible, for crimes he did not commit. He's presently in poor health, legally blind, and needs proper medical care, which he is not receiving in prison. So, all week I've had members of the Alamo ministry on. On Monday, on Monday I kind of laid out our plan and what we're going to do with this petition. By the way, I have Deborah Ondresek with me, and she's waiting patiently. She's a member of the Alamo ministry. But let me mention this. On Monday, I laid out a plan with this petition, and we're going to let it run through the holidays and allow Trump in January to get his feet wet in the White House. And then we're going to write up a nice request for a pardon for Tony. And I believe it's very timely because this is a huge case. It's not a small case. And it's also very, very timely in that Trump has received the biggest ecumenical Catholic vote in modern times for a president-elect. He also has told us in many of his campaign promises that he wants to bring back freedom of religion. The persecution of Christians around the world has not been emphasized. He wants to emphasize that. So I say, let's emphasize the persecution of Christians right here in the country. And this case is the watershed case. This is the case that he has to look at if he wants to live up to his campaign promises. He's also said he's going to get rid of the Johnson Amendment, which kind of muzzles pastors. And what that does is it doesn't allow them to talk about politics or a political candidate if they receive 501c3 money. He wants to get rid of that. There's no pastor in this country that's talked more about the truth behind the scenes, what's really going on in our country, and that's why Tony was targeted. So on Monday or Tuesday, I brought Bert Krantz on. And what I wanted to do with Bert was to talk about the ministry when it first started in the 60s, and it went all the way, we talked about the persecutions all the way up to 2008. Now, yesterday, I brought on Greg Seago of the Alamo Ministry, and what Greg talked about was I know Deborah's over there rustling. She's waiting to get on. But anyway, she'll be with me. You'll be right up with me, Deborah. Just hold tight. So anyway, what I did with Greg Seago was we talked about how the ministry, and Greg was there at most all the campaigns of Trump, and we went and talked about the reaction people were getting from the literature that the Alamo Ministry passes out regarding Tony's case as well as the Vatican, and we went through that yesterday. So what I want to do today with Deborah is I want to pick up in 2008 the final raid that put Tony in jail, took away their children, as well as these huge civil judgments against their ministry, which they want to just wipe them off the face of the map. So we're going to start there. Then what we're going to do is talk about the protests going on now by our college students, by people all over the country regarding the Trump presidency, and bring that to light with many, many things that they're talking about. We have Jesse Jackson talking about wanting to pardon Clinton. So we got that going on, and I'm going to relate that to why, if they even consider, and he's a minister from Chicago, right? If they even consider pardoning Clinton, the Clintons were the ones that persecuted Tony. So they got to pardon Tony. That's my point. So Deborah, how are you? Glad. I'm sorry I took so long, but I wanted to lay this out because these shows are very important, which I want to include in the petition that we give to the administration, the Trump administration, to try and free Tony. So how are you today, Deborah?
Well, I'm fine. I'm recovering a little bit from a cold that I got when I was at a rally a little over a week ago. Well, actually right before the president-elect got elected. And I'm fine, though, and I'm glad to be here.
Okay. Well, listen, let's start out with, as we left off with Bert in 2008. You were there during the raid, so bring us back to 2008 and bring us up to date till today regarding what they've done to your ministry. Go ahead.
Well, in 2008, it was September 20th, our pastor's birthday, and there was a raid of about, I'd say, 100 police cars and officers and a helicopter, at least one helicopter overhead, and a SWAT team that was sent in. It was
now this was Falk, Arkansas, right?
This was in Falk, Arkansas, and it was around 5 or 6 in the evening. I was still at work at my job in Texarkana, and the SWAT team came. Some of the girls were outside playing on the swings and just getting some fresh air in the yard. And the SWAT team came from behind, came through a gate in the back of the residence, and they had their full gear on, and they had their rifles, the high-powered rifles with the laser beams, and they came up and had them directed right at the girls and right at their hearts. And they were herded into the pastor's residence there and were made to just stay in there, and everybody was just cordoned off in there. And they had people, all kinds of people that were in there, and they said they were searching for pornography, which they never found any pornography. They never found any guns. Our ministry doesn't allow pornography, nor does it allow any firearms or any kinds of weapons there.
Now,
and
go ahead,
yes,
go ahead, continue, go ahead.
And they had their DHS workers there that had started questioning the girls and so on and so forth. There was all this confusion that was going on in that building and all the confusion that was going on outside. And it was very terrifying to the children that were outside, other children that weren't in that area where these girls were taken. And they were just terrified because of what was going on. And these children had never been involved in anything like that. And they took the 6 girls that night, and they took them somewhere in, I guess, Texarkana. And the next day, early in the morning, they were all interviewed by people at the children's. I don't remember.
If I could ask you, when did you arrive back at the ministry?
I got there, I believe it was around 7 in the evening. And the girls were already gone by the time I got there. They had loaded those girls up in a van, the ones they decided to keep, and took them off the property and somewhere in Texarkana, where they were interviewed the next morning early.
Now, what did your friends tell you went on? I'm sure when you got there you were shocked that this had occurred. How many SWAT team members were there, and were any of your children taken?
My daughter, Angela, was 16 years old, and she was taken. There were 6 girls taken altogether at the time. And as for what had happened, it was just like everything happened so quickly. There were so many government workers there doing this, that, and the other thing, and there was just a lot of confusion and a lot of terrifying things that had happened to these children that were involved, some that were taken and some that weren't taken. And
if I could ask you, did your friends at the ministry ever mention to you did they say why they came there? Did any of the officers present a search warrant?
I don't know if they ever presented a search warrant. I don't know about those details, no. I don't know what they told them when they came in. It escapes me now, whatever they had told them.
Okay, so now you're back at 7 o'clock. Take us through those hours before the next day when I'm sure you went down to try and find your daughter. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I got my son that was 12 years old at the time, and I took him and just stayed away from my home because I didn't know what was going to happen. I had a home in Texarkana, and I was afraid that they would try to get my son, which they eventually did in the next raid 2 months later in November. And it was just a terrifying time. I really didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know where they had taken my daughter or the other girls. And it was just...
So you had no contact with your daughter in those 2 months until they took your son, right?
Well, no, we did have contact. They had a probable cause hearing, I think it had to be within 5 days later. They had to, that's legally how they do it. And so I saw her briefly at the hearing, and then we were able to see her. We were able to visit with her, I think, once a week for a very short time with the DHS workers there, monitoring every word and making sure that we didn't say anything to her regarding Pastor Alamo or the case that they were building against him.
Now, Pastor Alamo wasn't there that evening during the raid. What happened? Where did they finally find him?
He was in Arizona, and I'm not sure the town, maybe Flagstaff, and they got him there about 5 days later, peacefully. There was no problem or anything, and so he's been there in prison now for over 8 years.
Now, when you first made contact with your daughter, did they give you a reason why they took her? Did they ever say to you?
Well, it was just suspected child abuse. But obviously there was no child abuse. And my husband and I both have a clearance from the Arkansas State Police saying that us, my husband and myself and Pastor Alamo had never abused our daughter, Angela Ondresek.
But they still kept her.
Yes, they still kept her.
And this was kind of the case with all the girls and boys that were taken, right?
Yes, there never was any abuse found on any of them whatsoever. And the reason they kept them, that I can see, is because they were taken to therapy. They were taken to, like, the cult awareness has different places called Wellspring and different mental health places around in different cities, and they were taken to therapists and to different people, and they were also their foster parents, the foster homes they were put in, were also carefully chosen, and the foster parents actually worked with the government against our children and told them how terrible we were, and that we were in a cult and our pastor was just terrible, and they were allowed to be constantly with people from, or on a frequent basis, people that had left the ministries and were being used, and some of them being paid by the government, and they were allowed to be with these people who worked also against them, who was basically, in a way, it was a brainwashing to get them to turn against their parents, turn against their church, and turn against everything they had ever been taught. And ultimately, it worked. It actually worked. And some of them actually wanted their parents, one of them wanted their the parents' parental rights to be destroyed, to be taken away. And that did happen with several of the groups of children. Their parents' rights were actually terminated because they refused to turn on Pastor Alamo, and because they refused to leave the ministry in this hostage situation where they had kidnapped our children and held them as hostage to get all of us to leave the ministry and to turn on our pastor and to actually testify against him in court. That was the real goal that I can see looking back in everything that's happened. I don't see any other reason for
Now, how many children were taken?
The first raid, there were 6 girls taken.
Okay.
Ranging from age 10 to 16.
Okay, then after that?
Okay, in November of 2008, 2 months later, we were in court. Many of the people from Fort Smith, parents from Fort Smith, and also parents from in the Falk area in Texarkana were at court not even because we had to be, but some of us were there just because we were hoping that we could testify for Pastor Alamo and to refute the accusations that these people that had already been trained in what they were going to say were accusing our pastor of and the parents of. And so we were all there, and they had this ad litem attorney named Amy Friedman who had put in a petition to take all of the foundation children, just collectively, all of them.
Now, this was not only in Arkansas, but all over the country, correct?
Yes, everywhere in the country.
So how many did they finally round up?
Altogether, I think they, including the 6 girls, I believe it was 36 children that were taken.
Now, most of these children have never, I know, well, let me ask this first. When I talked to Bert, who had a number of his children taken away, Bert said that they had come to him, the prosecutors came to him and said, if you back up our story that Tony had violated the Mann Act and was a child abuser, you can have your children tomorrow. And Bert wouldn't lie. Now, that shows to me they were building a false case against Tony, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And that's exactly what they were doing. And after this woman had put in the petition, this motion to take all the children, the judge had agreed to this. But he dismissed us, and it was at noon. But the Arkansas State Police held the doors to the courtroom shut. They were right in front of them with their guns, and they would not allow any of us to leave to alert anyone of what the judgment had just that had just happened.
The judge putting out an order to round up all the children, right?
That's right.
And, okay, so we have no child abuse ever found on any of these 36 children, I believe, correct?
That's right, not any. And this, we have statements from UAMS in Little Rock where they were examined, the next bunch of children that were taken on November 18th, and not one of them had any evidence of any kind of child abuse whatsoever. And they don't just examine them physically, but they talk to them and they try to find out if anybody has been abused in any way. And they never came up with anything. There was no child abuse, there were no guns, and there was no pornography ever found on the premises or on any person whatsoever.
Right. And, you know, on many of my shows in the past, I've gone over the trial of Tony, and he was charged with violations of the Mann Act. And if you don't understand what the Mann Act is, it's a way to get around actually having to prove actual child abuse. And what they said was that because you guys took trips across state lines in a bus to go to different ministries or for rallies or things like that, they said that there was crossing of state lines for the intent of sexual abuse of children. What I found interesting was that the 4 or 5 girls, this is over 40 years, the 4 or 5 girls that were coaxed were basically, as Bert said, backsliders who had a bone to pick with the ministry, which isn't uncommon when you have an open door policy. They got them, they coerced them, took them to Wellspring or to that Cult Awareness Network, and they were coaxed into testifying against Tony, correct?
That's right.
Go ahead.
They surely were.
And then
they were also wined and dined. Their expenses were made. Their babysitters were paid for. Their bills were paid while they were gone for the 1 or 2 weeks, however long it took for them to go to Wellspring. And they were schooled and trained in what to say. And then when they were in the courtroom, they put on their act with the tears and everything. And they also had Randall Harris, the FBI agent that led this attack against our ministry and against our pastor. He was sitting right there in front of the witness stand, and people that were in the courtroom could see and have testified that when they were asked a question, they would look at him and he would nod his head ever so slightly, either yes or no. And in other words, he was coaching them during the testimony, the false testimonies they were giving.
Now, you've told me before on shows that we've done that you knew these girls. Some of them even recanted afterwards, and they wish they hadn't lied about Tony, correct?
That is correct. Absolutely. And I knew the girls. I think I taught most of them at one time or another at the school that we had. And a lot of them well, let's put it this way. When everything was going fine, they were very happy. Everything was great. But if something went wrong, something that they had problems with, many of them were liars. Well, I say many. There was only about 5 girls.
Okay.
They were liars. They had a lot of problems. They couldn't get along with other people. Just different problems that they had. And bringing false accusations against people.
And I want to mention this, that none of these girls ever went to the authorities with these claims. They were sought out by the authorities, correct?
That's absolutely right. None of them went to the authorities, but they were capable and did cause trouble within the ministry.
Okay, I'll have to cut you off there because we have to take a break. We'll come back for the second half hour. My guest is Deborah Ondresek of the Alamo Ministry. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, welcome back to the second half hour of the Investigative Journal. My guest today is Deborah Ondresek of the Alamo Ministry, and we're going over the raid that took place in 2008 that put Tony Alamo in jail for 175 years. He's been in prison now ever since 2008 on false charges. And we're explaining one thing we talked about, and I just want to pick it up here, was Tony's trial was a kangaroo, worse than a kangaroo court. And there was one point in the trial, and I brought this out a couple days ago as well, where the jury came back and actually asked the judge, if he hasn't committed any crimes, can we still convict him? If there's no evidence of any crimes, can we still convict him? And the judge didn't answer it. He just said, follow my instructions. And I thought that to be very telling, don't you?
Yes, I do. I think that says it all right there.
Let's make it clear now, Deborah. I'm going to say this, and you agree with me or disagree. I think the reason that they persecuted you guys for 40 years is because you're preaching the actual Bible as the Protestant reformers did back when they were persecuted by the Jesuit order in the Vatican during the Protestant Reformation. And Tony was no different. He was telling the truth about the Vatican and all its tentacles. And I believe that is the main reason that the Clintons put John Peeler, an FBI undercover agent who has since recanted and stated, look, I could never find anything on these people. And he was even asked to kill Tony, and he didn't do it. He quit the FBI. He came forward with sworn testimony, as did a couple of other undercover agents who were not allowed to testify. If they were, Tony would not be sitting behind bars, and they knew that. So they didn't let these guys testify. That's why I call it a kangaroo court, why he should be pardoned immediately, and that's what we're going to do in January when Trump takes over. And I think we have a better shot with him than we ever would with the Clintons, because they were basically the ones that wanted to see you guys be wiped off the face of the earth in Falk, Arkansas, correct?
That's right. Yeah, and Bill Clinton, for sure. He went to Georgetown University. He's a Catholic in disguise. He's one of those Jesuits that are, you become whatever your enemy is, you become that so that you can destroy your enemy from within.
Right. So anyway, we have this Tony's trial. The first deal was to get rid of Tony. The second was to dismantle your ministry. First of all, they found there was no child abuse really ever found. Tony has not done that. Now, let me make an analogy here. It seems to me that when you look at a child abuser, if Tony was, this would be a pattern that goes on for years and years and years. And that's not the case. I've talked to so many people. There's never been anybody that's ever come to the authorities and said Tony was a child abuser. But
That's
if you
right.
look at the pattern of these pedophile priests in the Catholic Church, thousands of them around the world, they have a long history from the time, for many, many years, and many, many accusers, hundreds, thousands coming forward. It would seem to me there's a double standard here, that if they would take away your children, the people in your ministry, the children, because Tony was a threat, when there was never any child abuse found, then every Catholic kid should be taken away from the schools, correct?
That's absolutely right.
But they don't
For sure.
They don't take the property of the Catholic Church. They don't take the children away from these pedophile priests, but they label you a cult, and I believe they do it because that's what they are, and they just accuse you of doing the same thing. Correct?
That's right. And, in, I think it was 1540, the Jesuits the Society of Jesus was started, and it was used as a militant arm of the Vatican to quash the Protestant Reformation that had been kicked off by the printing press and the Bibles being printed, and Martin Luther and other people that were protesting against the Vatican and the horrors that they were doing back in that day.
We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. I want to progress here really in this manner. So the children were taken. Talk about the property settlements here, the judgments that have been. They had once in the 70s, while they were doing the same thing to taking children from different ministries into the Cult Awareness Network. We were talking about that. They were doing that in the 70s. Then in the 90s, they dismantled you guys. They took away all your property in Nashville and Miami. And then you guys started up again, built up several new churches through your hard work, and they come back in 2008 and try to do the same thing. So they take Tony, they take the children, now they want all your property. Fill us in on the judgments, especially the one in Arkansas, which is the largest civil judgment in the state's history, over $500 million, correct?
Yes, $500 million was given to those people who were really hand-picked after they had found out that they had left the ministry, and they were able to get a hold of them, bribe them, use them, take them to their training camp, which is the Cult Awareness Network, and get them to come back and testify falsely against our pastor. Yes, that was the largest judgment in Arkansas history. And big settlement, people will do a lot of things for money, especially if they've already turned their back on God and decided to go back into a life of sin.
Right, and so now they're trying to do the same thing they did to you in the 90s, but Tony's still upbeat while he's in prison. I get messages through other people, and he's upbeat, still preaching the Bible. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to read a letter that was that I got from it was from an inmate, and Tony helped this inmate get through very difficult times, and I'm going to read that letter to you. So he's still ministering in prison as we speak, and the ministry, your ministry, is going strong. You guys are still running your, passing out hundreds of thousands of literature all over the world. People on the petition are contacting me and writing notes and signing the petition and writing comments from all over the world, Nigeria, every part of the world, Europe, Africa, Asia, all over. So you guys are still going strong. You're passing out literature at all the campaign events that took place, and we talked about that with Greg. But I wanted to talk right now with you about what's going on after Trump was selected as president. We have these students now protesting, saying this. These students, these college students, I listened to it today. Why are you protesting Donald Trump? Well, he needs to be held accountable for his bad language. And I say to myself, is that a reason to thousands of people are up in arms? What about holding Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, a sexual predator, a Hillary Clinton who's allowed people to die in Benghazi, who's put our national security at risk, who's done many, many things. And there's a list of people that have died through circumstances that are incredible. They're not suicides. They weren't accidents. And this long list of the Clinton hit list, which is in the hundreds, why don't they hold her accountable? And the question I have, and this is where I want to go to, what's your thoughts about what's going on in this country right now in these protests?
Well, I know that for sure. Whatever's going on with it, it's something that has been planned because, as you said, Greg, nothing happens by accident. There's a pre-written script, and they want to bring something out of this chaos that the Vatican behind the scenes is bringing forward. And right now, that's what's going on. I'm not sure what they're up to, but I'm sure it'll all unfold as time goes on here.
Right, and so we have these people protesting like this. And today, and I want to make this clear, here's what we're hearing from the infamous Jesse Jackson from Chicago. He stated this today. He would like to see President Obama give Hillary Clinton a pardon across the board for anything she might have done in the past, including but not limited to her days in Arkansas, her days as First Lady, her days as President-elect, Secretary of State, Senator. He wants a complete conditional pardon. And I'm going, if they pardon her and Bill and all of her cohorts, which could number in the hundreds, then there's such a double standard here. Tony should be out of jail. They're leaving the criminals walk free, and an innocent man sits in jail for 175 years. This is how the Vatican operates. Your comments?
Well, yeah, and they actually haven't been convicted of crimes, but obviously people know they're criminals because they're trying to get a pardon for them. And it kind of reminds me of the Catholic confession, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. So what, Jesse Jackson wants the Obama to be the Pope now and just forgive these people? I mean, it's crazy. And we know that these people are criminals, and we know that they are promoted by the Vatican. And yet you see our pastor, who is an innocent man and who has exposed the Vatican for decades upon decades and done good for people, truly done good for people, never bombed anybody, never had any guns, never had any of this evil stuff that they accused him of. But they have him in prison for 175 years on false charges. Yeah, that's why they used the Mann Act, because it was something that it was the only thing they could do to get something on him to where, albeit falsely, that they could put him in prison. They could justify putting him in prison.
Right, because they could never show any evidence of child abuse, any hard evidence. It's incredible because there are child abuse statutes, sexual abuse statutes on the books. And let me just tell you about it. We talked about John Peeler and a number of the other agents that came forward to me and said, hey, we could never find anything in this guy. We tried to plant weapons. We tried to do all this stuff, but these people were there was nothing wrong. I mean, and John Peeler, he even came out on my show and apologized to Tony when I interviewed Tony many times, and gave his testimony. He's paid an awful price, and we'll get into that at another show. But the point I'm trying to make is, I remember talking to I did many stories on a New York police detective named Jim Rothstein, who actually was in Vice, was a detective in New York, and he had informants come forward, basically several people coming forward saying they were sexually abused children. One kid even stole Cardinal Spellman. That's the most powerful cardinal and man in this country back then, and still the cardinal in New York is the same. They found this kid comes forward and said, he was sexually abusing me, so I stole his shoe. And Jim had several people come forward stating, we have been abused by this cardinal. Guess what happened? It was never talked about. Jim Rothstein was finally told, either quit the police force or you'll be killed. So they cover all this stuff up, and they put Tony in jail. It's crazy. What's your thoughts on that one?
Well, my thoughts are that's the pattern and practice of the Vatican. That's what they do. That's how they operate. And they have the somewhat power to be able to do that. But it'll change eventually, because the thing that they always forget about is God and his judgment. But there's a real God that they're going to stand before. But yeah, that's what they've done to our pastor. And the very things that they do themselves are what they've accused him of.
Exactly. And I know you wanted to talk about this, and you'd prepared some things, because I think people have forgotten what the Protestant reformers were all about, and how your church is doing nothing rebellious, but only following in the path of true Christians. Tell us, go back in history a bit, Deborah.
Well, everybody's probably familiar with Martin Luther, and he's the one who he was a Catholic monk in the German state of Saxony, and he became disillusioned with the corruption and greed that he saw in the Catholic cult. So he began to lose faith that the church would lead him to salvation. He challenged the authority of the Pope and the nature of penance, and he took offense to the church's sale of indulgences, which were very common in the 1500s, as the church, under the leadership of Pope Leo X, needed money to fund the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica. And in the 1540s, the Catholic Church launched a counter-reformation to restore Catholicism in lands where Protestantism had taken hold. And that was called the Order of the Society of Jesus, known as the Jesuits, which is the militant branch of the Vatican. And they, right now we have a Jesuit Pope, as you know. Bergoglio is definitely a Jesuit. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to say, I don't know how much time we have left.
Go ahead. We got about 9 minutes, so go ahead.
Okay. There is a man named Tony Palmer, which you may have heard of. He was born in South Africa of British descent in 1966. And he was mentored by Jorge Bergoglio, Pope Francis, and Kenneth Copeland. Oh. He knew Kenneth Copeland for 21 years. Now, he considered Kenneth Copeland and Pope Francis to be his mentors and his spiritual fathers. That's what he called them. He was called by Rome to work with the Vaticanites in uniting the Protestant denominations with Rome. He was ordained a priest and later a bishop. Now, there's a video on YouTube, and it's called Pope Francis Sends Video Message to Kenneth Copeland, Let's Unite. And this is from 2014. And I wanted to take a few quotes out of it that Tony Palmer said. He's featured, well, it starts out with Kenneth Copeland, but then Kenneth Copeland introduces Tony Palmer.
Okay, go ahead.
And Tony says, if you are born again, you are a Catholic. The Catholic Church believed that we were saved by works, and that was the protest. So, in 1999, the Catholic Church and Lutheran Church worldwide signed an agreement which brought an end to the protest of Luther. 5 years later, the worldwide Methodists signed the same agreement. Now, this is Tony talking, and I'm quoting him.
Tony Palmer. Okay.
Tony Palmer, absolutely. The protest has been over for 15 years, he said. He says, if there is no more protest, then how can there be a Protestant church? Maybe we are all now Catholics again. We aren't protesting the doctrine of salvation by the Catholic Church anymore. We preach you're saved by faith alone. The word alone was the argument for 500 years. The protest is over. That's what he's saying. But the thing of it is, it isn't just doctrine, the doctrine of faith or works that was being protested. It was, as Martin Luther said, it was a sale of indulgences. It was the way the Pope was ruling and reigning over the kings and princes of the earth. It was the way they were keeping the common man, the poor people, in total ignorance to the Word of God, because the Catholic Church is the one who had the scriptures. And when the printing press was finally invented and the Bible was printed up in the language of all these different people, then they were able to find out what the Bible said, and they were able to see that indulgences was a phony doctrine.
Right, and I think Martin Luther even said that he found the traditions of the Catholic Church to be non-biblical, correct?
Yes, absolutely. You can line up everything that the Catholic Church says, all their lies, the Bible says that they're given a mouth speaking great blasphemies, and that's the media. And the media will spread around everything that these popes say, and they'll quote everything like it's Holy Writ from Bergoglio's mouth, and he's full of blasphemies against the Lord. And now at the end of this video of Tony Palmer, it shows Pope Francis bringing a message, a specific message that was sent to this video, this show, this program that they were doing, and it was on unity of religions or denominations. And then after the Pope's message, it was followed again by a message from Kenneth Copeland, reinforcing what the Pope had said. So they're all into this unity thing, and a lot of people think Kenneth Copeland is like a good old boy preacher from Texas, but really he is a Vaticanite, just like Billy Graham. I read recently that Billy Graham is the one who actually helped convince Ronald Reagan to get our country to get relations going again with the Vatican, and to quote Tony, to take our country into the Vatican whorehouse. And that's exactly what happened. So you have these wolves in sheep's clothing that are getting the so-called Protestants, who aren't protesting much anymore, to go back to join the Catholics, and everybody becoming ecumenical.
Yeah, exactly.
I did want to mention.
Go ahead.
Less than 5 months later, after this Tony Palmer video, Tony Palmer was killed in a motorcycle accident, and that was the end of Tony Palmer. But I'll tell you what, the protesting isn't over.
Correct. And another reason that the ecumenical movement and the Vatican wants everybody under the umbrella of the Mother Church is, I dare people to go to, if you live in a town, you're listening to me, go and check out the Protestant churches, the Methodist, all of it, and ask the pastors what they preach about the book of Revelations, and I'll lay odds they don't talk about the Vatican as the Antichrist. That's another thing. They do not want preachers really preaching what the Reformers stated in the Bible, what it actually states that and shows that the Vatican is the Antichrist organization. That's what they don't want as well. And I did a little thing. I lived in a small little town in Colorado for a while, and it boasted that per capita it had more Protestant churches than any town in the country. I made it a point to check out every one of them, and not one pastor there outside of the Seventh-day Adventists would pin the tail on the Vatican donkey as being the Antichrist. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's amazing, because the Bible says it so plainly and clearly. But, if you go to the Catholics, what they say, that the city of Seven Hills, they say it's Jerusalem. And whatever they do, they point everything away from themselves, or they say, oh, Babylon, it was old Babylon. Well, the Catholic cult is founded, all their pagan idolatry comes from the old Babylonian and Egyptian religions, and Isis and all the false gods, Ashtoreth and Moloch and all of that.
And let me tell you one thing. We got about a minute and a half, and I wanted to squeeze this in. I remember when I was talking to these pastors, and they were going, well, the Vatican is not the Antichrist, I took them the Geneva Bible. I said, do you know what the Geneva Bible is? And they go, well, yes. I said, have you read? Well, no, we use this Bible. I said, well, the Geneva Bible was the same people that translated the King James Bible had to flee to Switzerland, and this was the precursor to the King James Bible. And the difference is, let's go to the book of Revelations. They put footnotes in that Bible, and it actually states the Vatican. They were telling you, because the Bible was footnoted, and it actually pointed out that the Vatican was the Antichrist organization. Isn't that interesting? We have 30 seconds, Deborah. Your comments.
Yes, it is. So make sure you get rid of the Geneva Bible and all the side notes that they had, so that nobody knows. They have to stay hidden.
Exactly. And I want to thank you. We only got about 20 seconds here. But anyway, any message to these people about signing the petition? Go ahead.
Oh, it would be wonderful if everybody that hears this message can get out there and sign that petition. Just get on your internet and sign up there.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
And you can go to freetonyalamo.com to do that. And at the top, you'll see a petition. Just press that button, and it'll take you to the petition. Also, go to alamoministries.com. You can get many articles about this ministry, the true story about them. Deborah, thank you again. We're all out of time. I'll see you tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.